Hello. How's it going, guys? Here we are. Hey, 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 Wesley. All right. And Avery is here. Cool. I am somewhere. Where am I? Firefox. That's the ticket. All right. Whew. Well, if you guys are hanging in there okay, it's been a rough one for whole miles, man. I've been like, oh, I'm okay. I'm feeling okay now, but man, it's been a wild and woolly ride here. Whew. Um, but hey, we're here. We made it. We made it this far, so that's good. I've got my crooked hat on. I guess I'll teach like this. Um, so yeah, let's get back into it. Let's pick up the magic. Let's go over to the Figma page um, off of the Moodle site, and we'll get signed in. Um, so make a new sign in here. We'll go January. January 12th. So we'll go to Tuesday. There we go. There's the page. Tuesday. Okay. And just go ahead and we'll make here's a shape for us. I'll make it a beautiful color. There. So let's make some copies of this. Whee. Fly. Fly, minions. All right. Go ahead and start rocking those. Cool. So I want to kind of get us through the this process of actually just making something together, kind of like we're doing, where we're kind of playing around, because the process of doing this is fairly elaborate. And I also got the YouTube videos are up. The channel is up on the Moodle site now too. There's a little link there to the playlist for YouTube for the class lectures. So that's going. That's cool. And we'll get this up and running. And yeah, let's see one moment here. Okay, so that's going. We'll get into some Blender today. We'll have some fun and make some stuff move around or appear to move. Because as we learned already, it's all fake. It's not real. Cool. So let's see. Yeah, well, let's just jump back into it. I'll start screen sharing here. This one. And this one. And this one. All right. Are you guys seeing some Blender there? Yeah. Good. Okay, cool. All right. So previously in motion graphics, let's just I'll open it up the way it was. All right. So we had, go a little darker here. We had something that looks like this. And just to review, we covered a lot of stuff, and we'll go back over all of this because probably you just forgot everything. And given what's been going on, I wouldn't blame you. But we'll go back through this. But you'll have seen it once so that it can go really fast. Like, we spent like 2 hours or an hour getting to this point when really it would take us like 3 minutes or something, or 5 minutes, once we know what we're doing. But that's kind of the point. So we're taking our time with it, and that's okay. So we want to get comfortable with it. And so I want you guys to just go and practice a lot, just try to start, see how far you get, and just start making some things and playing around with it. So, and one of the things that, I hope we can get out of this is that we're developing an approach that's going to be flexible and that lets us do other things. That's what I'm kind of excited about with this, is you get a chance to see, like I can do this now, so it's not so much like we're making the world's most exciting thing right here, but you can make the world's most exciting thing with these techniques. Like we're saying, we're trying to keep, like we said with the Saul Bass stuff, we're trying to keep the technical overhead down. So you don't have to know 50,000 different keystrokes or techniques, but you can really start to get a good handle on this by thinking about what we talked about with the animation principles. So like, or not principles, but whatever. Some of this that we talked about here in terms of thinking about the real basics, we're talking about changing location, rotation, and scale, color, opacity, and layer order. And this is really going to be the basis for doing all kinds of things with motion graphics. We'll see if we get into the camera, but we talked about timing as the most important aspect of animation, and timing to review is just when something happens. Or we could talk about it even more technically as it's anything that it's the distance between two keyframes on the timeline. That's your timing. So if you want to put it technically, that's kind of cool. That's a nice simple definition. So when we start to critique things more, we can say like, well, the timing feels a little slow, or maybe that needs to happen faster. Then we're talking about timing. And so the way we fix that is by moving keyframes around the timeline, which is kind of great because I love that. That's so simple. Even I can do it. It's like, I like those types of things where, yeah, I can move some dots around on the key. Yeah, that's different. Okay, cool. But that's going to be your most important editing tool, is to be able to move those keyframes around on the timeline. So that's what we got to last week. And so we're going to talk this week about the rate of change, about, and we're going to talk about how to manipulate that. But I also just want to kind of talk a little bit more and show you a little bit more just about the basics of the way we might do things in this program. So we're going to start to edit some things. So timing is going to be, in a sense, the most important edit. So, if I go here and I make this happen slower. Oh, 1 second. I'm going to adjust one thing here on my system profs. Are you guys seeing some flicker on my screen? Is it kind of flickering a little bit? Are you noticing? Okay. All right. Well, if it's a problem, I'll switch it. But I just wanted to change this. Where did it go? Dell, built-in retina. Arrangement. There it is. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Are you still seeing Blender? Okay, cool. Sorry, this is such a pain. I'm just like trying to figure out this 3 monitor thing. It's almost working. Okay, so timing. So now we're going to make this thing move slowly. So that would be our most important move, is to really get the timing down. So like this, we'd say, and so you want to just get in the habit of saying, now that feels too slow. Now, is it too slow? Well, there's no right or wrong. So that's the other thing just to say about animation is that really quickly it becomes a matter of choice and it becomes a matter of artistic intent. So that um, if you want it that way, make it that way. If it's supposed to be slow, make it slow. If it's supposed to be fast, make it fast. But I think if you're like most people and like me, you don't know what that is. You don't necessarily have a good sense of what that is. You might just look at your animation and say like, this sucks. Like, as I'm looking at this, I might just feel like, I don't, it's kind of cringy. It's making me feel bad. And a big part of that is because we don't have the language for what's making something look wrong, so to speak. We just go, make it go away. So we're going to kind of hold in there. We're not going to run away screaming, never come back to the computer again. We're going to, but we're going to try to learn how to break down like what the issues are and how we can change them. So for me, when I was looking at this, um, the first time I said, now there are a couple things that kind of bug me about this. And the first one is the timing. So this is too slow. So that was the first thing we did. And just to review, it's just you come down and grab these things on the timeline. Now, as we move these things closer together, it becomes faster. So we're like, okay, oh, that's kind of cool. That's like, maybe that's too fast. So how do we slow it down? Move it the other way on the timeline. So, like, again, I love it that it's that simple. And like, I'm kind of dyslexic, so I kind of get those things mixed up sometimes. So, but it's okay. You can do it because there's just two options. Moving them closer together is faster and farther apart is slower. So then you just kind of want to do it till it's just right. It's like you're just getting it totally, you're trying to Goldilocks it here, or whatever. So let's say, okay, that's it. That's what I want. And again, it's an arbitrary thing. And so this is my point about that is you're not going to know just by saying, oh, yes, this is 30 frames or this is 20 frames. You have to see it and you have to adjust it. So don't just do it once and accept it. Go too much until it's too fast, go too much till it's too slow, and then kind of do that thing. It's like tuning a guitar or something. If you've ever uh, played an instrument, you're trying to tune it, it's like you're trying to adjust it back and forth, back and forth. You kind of hone in on it and you get it. And so timing is that way. And we'll say much more about timing, but let's say that's good enough for right now. And the second thing that's bugging me is it bugging anybody else? Can you see it? I don't know. It's pretty subtle. I mean, it's hard to even see on this screen. Um, but I feel like the movement, the path that it takes, it kind of slides in as opposed to coming like down with a direction. I want it to do this, but it's kind of doing this. It's kind of sliding, wiping in. So how might I fix that? Well, if we were in grease pencil, which is where we drew this rectangle, which we'll review, we could turn on this. They have this nice feature that most animation programs have called onion skinning, which lets you see the previous frames. But for us, in 3D, there's not a built-in one in Blender. Most programs, they're for some reason it's really janky. They don't have solid 3D. There's a plugin for it you could get, but what we'll do is we're going to make some quick copies of things, but this will also let you see how this stuff works. And it shows you that sometimes you kind of got to think these things out on your own if there's not an immediate way to do it. So I want to have this more direct movement. So, all right. So I could guess. I could just kind of go back and forth and move these keyframes around, and I've done that many times in an animation until it looks right, and then I'd move on, and the end. But I'll just show you just some other kind of things that could be interesting. So I'll go here. I'm going to make a copy of this rectangle. So Shift D, and these are both animated. So when I made a copy, Shift D is duplicate, and that includes, it also copies the animation over to that object. Now, if I go to move one of these objects, and I can select it over here in the outliner, I'll select the copy. I hit G to move, and then I'm going to slide it over here. All right. Now, as the default, what's going to happen when I start to scrub the timeline is it's going to jump back to the place where it was. It's going to ignore this move, and it's going to pretend like it never happened. So what happened? All of my carefully laid plans have been scoffed at. So try that again. So I go over here and I move it. All right. Well, part of the issue is if you look at the timeline, we're on frame, in my case, I'm on frame 15. There's no keyframe on there, first of all, nor did it make one on that. So it has no recorded data that I did that move. So it just ignores it. It just pretends it never happened. So if I wanted it to jump out at frame 15 or frame 20 or whatever, I could go out here, and this is a review of what we covered last week. I could say I have to hit it on the keyboard. I can't just say it. So I say I, and I could choose location and set a location keyframe. So if I do that, now we have a keyframe here. But what that's going to do, it's going to add to the animation. So it's not, and so it goes down to here. It comes in here. And so now it's interesting. It seems to have changed the path. And there's a reason for that. That's going to, when we talk about the rate of change and the easing, we'll see that in a second. But let's not worry about the fact that it changed the path. But then it keeps going, right? So we've got a third keyframe here. And so I could set another keyframe over here. So move to frame 30, G, move, and I, location. So it sets the keyframe. And then I could go to frame 50 and set another one. I, location. All right, so. And you can see these are all moving with different timings because of just the distance. It's like distance over time, and that's what gives you that's the formula for how the computer interpolates or figures out how to move these things. And so, we can scrub this one frame at a time. And I think that's is it there? Oh, can't remember if I told you about this, but in Blender, the keyboard shortcuts depend on where your cursor is located. So that, like if I hit a key shortcut here, it does something different than it would do if my cursor were down here in the timeline. It's kind of cool. It's kind of annoying, depending. So, but it's the way it is. So I always forget this, and I'm like, and then I laugh and I move on. So we'll come back down here. I'll move my cursor in here. And if I hit the arrow keys, it advances the frame one frame at a time. So this is very useful. So you can kind of see, so a bigger rate, if the thing moves, if there's bigger space between two frames of movement, it moves faster. If the space between them is closer, it's slower. So you can see just by, we're just doing this manually here. You can see where it's not moving very much. That means it's moving slower at that point. And then over here, as it starts to move faster, or the gaps become bigger, it's moving faster. So it's taking bigger jumps. That's why we call what we're going to talk about in a moment. We're going to call that spacing. So it's like, are the frames spaced closer, are the drawings rather on the frames spaced closer together or farther apart? If they're closer together, they're slower, and if they're farther apart, they're faster. Again, please, if that sounds simple and obvious, that's good. We want it to be simple and obvious. In practice, it tends not to be. But the concept, if you can always keep reducing it back to the concept, you'll actually get control over your animation much quicker, and it's much more satisfying as an animator. You'll enjoy it a lot more if you can kind of go, okay, there are two simple things basically. Well, three: the timing, the spacing, and then the actual positioning of the keyframes too, like where the poses. We'll call it the poses. So I'm going to get rid of these extra keyframes. Again, down in the timeline, I can select them and hit X and say delete keyframes. Now, back to where we started. Actually, it made two copies. Okay. So, and it's interesting because if you remember before when we added that third keyframe, the path deviated about how it hit, like the two objects separated from each other. I'll show you that again. So if I go here and pick this and move it and hit I, then they're no longer in sync. And again, that's a preview. I want you to remember that they went out of sync. But as soon as I got rid of this keyframe, they go back to being in sync. Oh, I just deleted the whole thing. Because my cursor was in the wrong place. So I'm going to delete the keyframe, not the object. All right, there we go. So now they're back to being in sync. So this started to drive me crazy in things like character animation, where you're like, wait, why is this happening? Curse you keyframes. But we'll see. We'll learn how to control it. And you don't have to experience the helpless rage that I felt. You don't have to suffer. All right, so we're back to this. So I wanted to adjust the motion path, like the path that this thing takes, so that it looks more convincing, like the way that I would point my finger, like this. I don't go like when I point my finger, I don't go like this. I go like it's like directional. So let's do that. So part of the issue, no, this is the whole issue. So I made this duplicate. So what I want to do is on the duplicate, I want to get rid of the keyframes on the duplicate only. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go down here, select these keyframes, and I've got my rectangle 01, my copy selected, and I'm just going to go and hit X down here, and they're gone. So now that's just sitting there at the last known location. It's no longer animated. My copy is no longer animated. And this is kind of cool because this is going to act as kind of like a fake onion skin. I can be like, well, I want my object to move straight, because when I do this with my finger, the movement is basically going along the axis of my finger. It's doing this. That's why it's not doing this. I'm not pointing like this. I'm pointing like this. So we want this thing to move, to start here and then move down along the axis. And you can see the first frame, it's not moving along the axis. It's actually sliding along two axes. It is moving along that, but it's also moving along the sideways axis. So it's kind of going ramp. So how do we fix that? Well, one way we can do it, and there are several variations on this, but we'll go back to our animated one, and we'll just reset the first keyframe so that it's basically, and I'll hit G and I'll just slide it over. So it's basically on top of that, because we know this is where it ends up. So now when I slide this, aha. And why did it jump back? Because I didn't set a keyframe. So I'm gonna, and I've been animating for many years. I always forget to set a keyframe, and it's really annoying. And then I go, oh yeah, I'm animating, and then I remember after that. But there's a magic button that I kind of hesitate to tell you about. I love it. I use it all the time. But then I also came to kind of be a little bit wary of it because it can kind of screw you up. And it's the automatic keyframe button. Yeah. Auto keying. Super cool. It's great. Um, Grease pencil, in a way, is always auto keying on. But in this 3D view and the object view, sometimes you want it, sometimes you don't. So it's there. I'm not going to use it yet. I'm just going to get myself back in the habit. So G to move, and then just go over here, line it up. What's the shortcut? I. Insert keyframe. What kind of keyframe? A location keyframe. All right. So now I've reset the key to change the pose. So vocabulary wise, I would say that each keyframe when we're in object mode is a pose. You know, it's literally kind of where we're saying like, this is the position. This is like, if you went like this, then you went like this, right? We're posing. So in the grease pencil, we're actually drawing. That's a little bit different. I mean, you can still talk about poses there if you're doing a character, but I would think about those almost more as like drawings. And then here we're talking about posing an object in a position, because an object is a thing and a drawing is a many things, lines, you know. So here we go. So it goes now. If you we can kind of see that with that still there. It's like, oh, that's cool. That actually looks like it's sliding along the axis. Nice. So let's see what that looks like. Yeah. There we go. So we've made our animation a little better. You know, we fixed it. We fixed the pose and we fixed the timing. And we might still, the more we look at this, we're like, that seems a little fast. Call me old fashioned. Take things slow. Do that. We might be like, boring, you know, speed it back up. So, but maybe, so whatever. I don't want to just keep going on about this, but like you see that that's kind of like the way that we do it, basically. So in a very real sense, this would be your job if you were a 3D animator. You wouldn't be using this kind of stick thing, but you would have a 3D model, like a puppet, and then you would pose it, and you'd be adjusting the timing and the poses. So what we just did is that's like a huge part of being an animator, is just like figuring out the poses and the timing.
Can you explain how to slow it down again?
Sure. So if I want this to happen slowly, I just grab the last keyframe and pull it to the right.
Okay.
I love it. That's a great question. That's the question that I want to hear. It's like this is it. It's like we're learning like two things, like move it to the left, it gets faster, move it to the right, it gets slower. And it's really good to get this separate from what we're going to talk about next, which is the spacing or the rate of change. The timing is like, if you can keep it as simple as you possibly can, which is like, is it happening too slow or is it happening too fast? You know, and then you'll be able to adjust it. And it's also, there's a bit of a mood thing there too. Sometimes you go like, oh, this needs to happen faster. And a lot of times we get stuck in a rut. And then this is one of the things that'll come up when we start to do critiques of things, is that 90% of the time I'll say these keyframes, they should probably have, the timing's too slow. Probably needs to happen faster, because a faster motion tends to be more convincing, because what happens is if you look at the way people actually move, we tend to move what we would call an animation pose to pose. So I'm not, if you can see me here, I don't know if you can see me, and I'll stop sharing for a second just to be obnoxious for a moment. Like, so when I'm sitting here, I'm in a pose, and I might go like, you know, you guys should do this, right? And so the actual amount of time that it took my hand and arm and body to move into this pose was probably like what, like 3-4 frames maybe, if we're breaking this down into 24 frames a second. So it's not this. I'm not saying like, you know, what you guys should do is this. And I think you should, you know, always be aware of the magic of motion graphics, because motion graphics are fun and there are things you can do like every day. You're like if I just keep moving, it's weird. We're like, what the hell is this guy doing? So we tend to go, to hit a pose. And then there's a little bit of movement. So it's not like if I do this, you're not like, oh my God, he's dead. You know, we're aware that I'm still alive. And that's because we move into what are called moving holds, you know, and so there's a little bit of movement. We'll talk about that later. So we're here, I'm basically in this pose. And then I might go like over to here and say, yeah, you know, we should do this. And I'm not like voguing. I'm not trying to be like glamorous or something. We're just kind of naturally do this stuff. You know, we might do blah, 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 blah. But I'm still basically in this pose with a little bit of movement on my hand. I'm getting self-conscious because I'm staring at myself move around, but that's what we do as animators. So you have to get used to looking at yourself move. So, all right, so that's holds and moving holds and posing. We'll talk much more about that later. So, all right, well, this looks pretty good. So again, not a bad time to save our work. And I'm going to recommend that you guys get used to using this nice handy feature down here, which is it turns red when I'm going to save as.
You're not sharing your.
Oh, that sucks. Yeah. Thank you. So let me try it again. So if I'm going to save this, but instead of just hitting save, I'm going to do save as. Or I'm actually sharing the right screen or the wrong screen. Is this Blender? Okay, you guys are good. All right. So I've got this here, and this turns this bright red. And so what that's telling us is that if I just hit save as now, it's going to overwrite the previous file, which that's what happens when you hit save. But for save as, I'm going to hit this little plus button. And what I'd encourage you guys to do is to give your files a number at the end. So that's the version number. This is a little bit old man style, like, because there's so many ways to kind of deal with versioning, and like Blender has autosave features and all that kind of stuff. But I just find that this really helps when you're doing something complicated, and these are complicated things that you're doing, like with lots of moving pieces. You always want to have a little bit of extra backup, because things can go wrong, things can get corrupted or screwed up in a way that can be very sad. And you're talking about losing a lot of work potentially. And it's also good because you can kind of check back if something actually looked better earlier and things like that. So don't worry if you have 10, 15, 20, 80 versions of a file, if it's something big that you're working on. You might want to reorganize the names and things like that. But for right now, I'm just going to hit the plus sign. And it says, oh, you mean O2? Yeah. And so it's no longer red. And I'll be like, yeah, that's cool. So now I'm working on Saul Bass Day 02. So now if I screw something up here, I can go back and see what it looks like before. And it's also not a bad way to see if you're going insane or not. Because in animation, you can get kind of lost in it, where you can work for a while and say, I think I just made this worse. And you can go back and check, you know. And a lot of times you're actually making it look better. It just, you've developed you're focused on a new problem. And so you're frustrated by that problem, but you actually fixed a problem between the two versions, you know. So excuse me. All right, so let's talk about easing or spacing. And I'll drag this back over here. Let's kind of talk about it here for a sec. All right, so we'll call this spacing, easing, F curves, it's not rate of change, it's F curves. Fine. So if timing is kind of our first priority, this is our second priority. And third, I'll just put it over here, as we talked about, was our posing. So just before I go on to this, in the example we were just looking at with the box moving in, I think that the pose kind of sucked, but it was less important than the timing. So I always emphasize the timing first. And this is true of the drawing. Sorry, my throat is catchy here. So like if your drawing sucks, we're not necessarily going to be doing a lot of drawn animation because it's motion graphics, but it's kind of good to think about it as the posing. Maybe the posing needs to change, but that's a separate issue from the timing. If you can get the timing to work, the posing will follow, I think. So, but if you fix the pose and the timing's off, it still looks horrible. All right. So spacing, easing, and F curves. And let's talk about them and then we'll do them. So, so the reason why it's called spacing is if we have two frames, frame 1 and frame 2, and we have an object. I'll screw this up. This is not going to work. This would be, it's more like, so I'm not going to do that. That was kind of awesome though. Let's do this. So here's version 1 and here's version 2. So in this one, this is frame 1 is here. Our ball starts in the same position. Okay. And let's not necessarily, well, let's use frame 2. Sure, that's fine. So in frame 2, here, the ball moves a little bit. So that's frame 2. And on this one, the ball moves a lot. So that's frame 2. So we see this bigger distance. So the spacing is bigger. This is faster. And this is slower. So when we see that the object has not moved very much, we know that it's moving slower. And if we see that it's moved a lot, it's moving faster. Now, there are basically a couple of constant spacing approaches. So if my object moves an even amount each frame, we would call this linear. And if we have, these things go together. If we bunch these up, so maybe they're moving here, and then the spacing gets bigger, and then it starts to slow down. So this would be like a nonlinear, or I wouldn't call it nonlinear. I would call this more like uneven spacing. Or we could say slow, fast, in, out. Now, at some point we can go through and practice with this a little bit. I don't want to get too bogged down in this. But if you can kind of almost visualize that, like as things are moving slower, they're spaced out more closely, and as they're moving faster, they're farther apart. I want to go and talk about what we're going to use a lot more in motion graphics, which is an F curve. And an F curve, it just means function curve. And this is common to all motion graphics programs, After Effects, whatever. Animate, all animation programs basically have some kind of, well, that's not true. If you have like a really basic animation program, like, Procreate can do some animation, or they're not really dealing with this kind of interpolation. They're just doing frame by frame. So if you're doing frame by frame, you're doing it this way. You're manually spacing the frames out. Not the frames, you're manually spacing the poses out on the timeline to get this effect. But what we're going to be using as motion graphics folks is 9 times out of 10, we're going to be using F curves to do that. So we're not going to have to go in and really, in the animation class, I think we would get way more into this, and you can still do it and it's still helpful. And as a motion graphics artist, you'll want to know how to do it this way, kind of the oldie fashioned way, because it really lets you get finer control when you need it. But like I said, 90% of the time you're going to be using this to do your animation. So what is an F curve? It's a function curve. And what it says is if we have 2 keys represented as a graph, so we have our timeline, in which the keys are represented like this. So it's like frame 1, frame 5, so we've got our keys here. So this is the timeline. When we're talking about spacing or easing or F curves, we're saying what does the spacing look like between on frames 2, 3, 4, and 5. So are they, so these are constant, right, on the timeline. So the timeline, the distance between the frames doesn't get bigger or smaller, right, on the timeline. That's a constant. But what is going on here? How are these things moving? And so if we have this first one up here in linear animation, we could represent this on a graph. Okay, so this is going to be time down here. So this is our timeline. So over time. And this is going to be the property that's being animated. So let's just make this simple and we'll call this location. So each axis will have its own function curve, X, Y, and Z. So what's going to happen is we're going to say, let's say this is moving in the X direction, which is left to right. So we're keeping this really simple. We're just basically going to do an animation on one axis here. So this ball is moving on the X direction, left to right. And so I could say it starts here. Let's say this is arbitrarily assigned. This is X position 100. And this is X position 200. So I'd go up here in my location and I would say this is 100. Okay. And then let's say this is 200. Right. So this is just a number line going up this way. And this is a number line going this way. So time, let's say this is frame 1. And let's say this is frame 5. All right. So the way we would graph this is we would say on frame 1, our object is at position 100. And on frame 5, it's at position 200. So it's like kind of like a math thing. And we'd say, and if we're doing this, that will be represented as a straight line because it's changing constantly. The gap between these is equal. So that's a straight line represents an equal change over time. And so this is what we call linear interpolation. And so these are types of interpolation. So I'll add that up here to our notes really slowly, apparently. Interpolation. And that's a math kind of computery term. That means given 2 values, given a set of data or something, how do we interpret or determine other members of that set? Or how do we determine based on kind of like logically, how do we break that down? So how are we, and so linear interpolation is the one that kind of makes the most sense to us. And this was the biggest surprise to me in animation, is like linear interpolation kind of sucks. Like you generally don't want it, except for when you do. And there are definitely times when you do want it and you need it. But a lot of times, most of the time for doing naturalistic stuff, you want change. You don't want, because linear interpolation just looks weird in real life. It's like the way machines move. And so since we tend to move slow to fast to slow, that's why the default F curve is going to be, you're going to see what it looks like when we go back over to Blender. So what we might choose to do is bend this curve. So, and this is, again, we're going to see this in action. So don't worry if this doesn't make total sense yet. So heck, I'm using a computer. I should do this. Just copy it. So I've got the same 2 points here, right? But instead of drawing a straight line, I could draw a curved line. I could draw an arc. So I could do something like this. So if anyone's feeling sassy, what is this going to give us? Describe how the motion is going to change from here to here. How is this motion going to happen now? So from frame 1 to 2, is it going to be moving slower or faster than it does over this?
It moves slower.
Slower, yeah. So if the line, if the slope of the line is flatter, it means less change. And if it's steeper, it's going to be faster here. So we can have different curves. So if I have a curve that looks like this, between 2 points, it's going to be fast to slow. So this is slow, and this is fast, and this is fast, and this is slow, and this is not linear. So go away. So we'll just call this kind of a curved approach. So if you were to and we can actually look at this, we'll actually do this example, but if we were going to do something like a bouncing ball, or let's say you're jumping on a trampoline, and if you've had the animation class, we've talked about this before, but like if you jump on the trampoline, it's good to make sound effects, So you guys have all jumped on a trampoline before, right? And lived to tell the tale. So it's fun. We like jumping on the trampoline. And what happens is you go down, right? You're down at the bottom and you crouch down, and then you go and you explode up into the air. And then you go, and then the trampoline's pushing you up. So you go, and so what happens is you go, wah! And then you're like, whoa, I can see like the playground from here. This is so cool. And then you go, vroom, and you go down. So what's happening is you're going boing, boing, boing. And so what's happening, I guess I should, look at you. So it's going like this. It's like bring, ding. And so what's happening is you're going fast from the bottom. And then as you go, you slow down. And you come to the top, and you're like, oh, I wish I could keep going, but this is as far as I go. And you get up here, and you get that little hang feeling, right? That's on the trampoline. Like if you're just jumping by yourself, you don't really get much of a hang, unless you're like a, Michael Jordan or something. But like, so you're like, wee. So you come up here, and then you're like, oh, well, this is okay. I guess this is all right. And then you're like, oh, gravity. And so then you start going down, but you're going kind of slow at the beginning. That's what's kind of cool about it. You kind of hang out. You're like, yeah. And then you accelerate down. It's like, so you're going like doing, 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 doing. That's not a linear movement. A linear movement would be this. It would be so. So a bouncing ball, if you looked at the spacing of a bouncing ball, it would look like this. So you would have, it would be extremely close. And in fact, it can be overlapping. It might be something like that. and it starts to get faster and faster. And then it might hit down here, you know. So the spacing for a bouncing ball would look something like this. So it's like bunched tightly here and then really spaced out down here. And so we would represent that on our curve. You know, this would look something like this. Would look like this. It would be like, here's our graph. So over time, let's say this is the ball's, this Z position. So it would be, let's say up here, this is like 200, and let's say this is 0, whatever. So this is 0, so this is Z location. And then this is going to be time. So over time, we start here, and let's say this is frame 1, so we're not doing it right on the number line. We'll just say, okay, this is frame 1. So it's starting here. That's our first key. And then over time, let's say, whatever, 5 seconds later, it's down here at 0. No, oh, I'm on the bottom. Whatever. And then at over here, beep, 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 it's at 10. And so then it's back up here. Right, so this is the representation of this. So if I did this and just connected these as a V, it would just be that linear. It would be it wouldn't look like a bounce. So the bounce, it's going to be at the height of the bounce, it's moving slow, and at the bottom of the bounce, it's moving fast. So it would look like this. It would be kind of like a bird that you would draw in elementary school. And then, so that would be a bouncing ball curve. So this is the bouncing ball. Yeah, cool. And then we're going to see one last trick that we'll see. We probably won't get to this week, but is that I'll just put it up here in the notes so we can start to look forward to this, is that curves can be extrapolated. So that this is cycles. So this is cool because what we can do is extrapolation as opposed to interpolation, whereas extrapolation says given, you know, let's say a move from A to B, could we extend that move as far as we wanted to, given the information between A to B? So it would be like if we had a simple version of this would be, oh, if I'm moving in this linear way, I could say to extrapolate this would be like, just keep going. You know, that's extrapolation. Where you don't have to set additional keys. The computer does it for you, basically. So if we want to have this ball bounce infinitely, instead of having to animate each part of the bounce ourselves, we could just do it on this F curve, whoops, and then we can set the extrapolation to make it go and cycle like a sine wave. It would just go on infinitely. But we're not going to do that today, but just want to throw that out there for where we get to. Cool. So we covered kind of a lot there, and we'll see how that works. But just before I go on, I just want to make sure, are there any questions? Yeah. It'll save or destroy your life, or both. So true. You know of what you speak. Yeah. Yes. So any questions on this, or just, I mean, you know, it's kind of fun to think about this stuff. It's a lot. This kind of confused me for a long time, but so you don't worry if you don't get it right away. I think you just have to start playing with it and you'll get the hang of it. Cool. All right. Well, I'll take that as we're ready to go. We'll go back over to Blender and we'll kind of make it start to happen over here. So we're not talking about color yet. Like we're not talking about design. We're just really talking about movement and not even movement. We're talking about change over time. So if you think about this, these principles of posing, timing, and spacing, those only make sense when you talk about time. Posing, I guess you can talk about in a painting class, but pose to pose, you couldn't talk about in a painting class, right? So we should talk about that as maybe pose to pose, like the idea that you're changing poses. In painting, you paint a pose, and that's it. Painting doesn't move. You don't have timing in a painting. You might have like timing in a painting. I could easily envision having a conversation or a critique about the timing but again, it's kind of meta. It's abstracted. It's a matter of interpretation. Spacing, it's like, what the hell is that? That doesn't have any relevance in painting, I don't think. So, or drawing, but you can talk about things being spaced out in a drawing or a painting, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about spacing over time. So these three things are the key motion graphics kind of technical ideas, and that they apply to a lot of different things. So timing, F curve, spacing, whatever we want to call it, and posing, that refers to like position, rotation, and scale, but it also refers to color. It also refers to particle effects. It refers to animated typography. All those things were, but these are kind of the three key things that you're going to do with different properties or different objects. So what we're covering this first 2 weeks is super duper important. It's really the whole thing. And then once you kind of get the hang of it, you can do whatever you want with it. Okay. So let's look at F curves in Blender. So Blender has a very customizable workspace, which is cool. So what we might do is we'll drag our timeline down here. And I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to go.
You aren't sharing your screen.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's that kind of a day. Thank you. So I just, you can customize your interface. You can make windows bigger and smaller. I'm going to go ahead and delete our reference rectangle over here because we don't need it anymore. So it's just going to confuse us. All right. And, the keyframes go away unless you have an object selected, and then the keyframes come back for that object. So I've had that moment of like, where'd the keyframes go? They're there. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a new window to look at this. So we're going to go right click here, and we're going to say right click on the space between the two windows here and go horizontal split. So I'll just pull this up here. And right now I just made a copy of the 3D view, but I want to change this. So if I go up here, this is the editor type. So each window has an editor type to it. And you can change these, so if I wanted to change this to the dope sheet over here, I could change this to the dope sheet, but I'm going to change that back to the properties panel. So I want to change this to the graph editor. And the graph editor is where we can see our motion curves.
Sorry, how did you split the screen again?
Yeah. So, and in fact, I'll also show you how to join the screen back together, and then I'll show you how to split it. But what you're doing is you're looking for the split between two windows. Anywhere there's a split, you can kind of add new stuff there. So I'm going to go here, and I want to join these. So I'm going to, where it becomes this little horizontal arrow, that means you're at the split. So you right click on it, and I'm going to say join areas. Now check this out. So then I get depending on where I move my cursor, it says, well, which way do you want to join it? It doesn't really matter because they're the same window. So I'm going to join it down here and it joins back together. But to split it, I went down here where the split is here, and I went, oh, give me a horizontal split. And I could join it back. I could also go over here to where it splits here between the 3D view and the properties panel. I could go here and I could say, give me a horizontal split here. It would do the same thing. Yeah. So I want to change this. And the way we change is the very upper left-hand corner of each window, including the timeline down here, it says editor type, editor type, editor type. So in the upper left-hand corner, these all have their own icon symbol. And so this is the icon symbol for the 3D view. Oh, I don't have my little cursor thing on. I should have it on, I guess. It makes it a little easier. Over here. So we can switch this over to the graph editor. There's a shortcut, Shift F6. I've never learned these shortcuts, so usually I'm a shortcut kind of a guy, but not for these. Okay, so graph editor, and hey, we have a graph editor. It's kind of hard to see. Oh god. Oh, this is funny. I mean, you can change all the colors and things and customize this, which I should do for this class. I haven't done it yet. You do this with the preferences, but oh my God, it's so, I'll just show you just so we can have a laugh here. Edit preferences. So you go to preferences and you're like, I want to change some of these colors. And it's under themes. And you're like, oh no, this looks complicated. And then, oh, but actually, hey, this actually might work. Might be able to do this. Graph editor. Hey, okay. So there are many choices here. So I'm trying to figure out what is the actual background. And the irony about this is that a lot of times the color that you want to change is not handled here. It's handled in another part of the theme preferences because it's like backgrounds or something like that. So I'll start to change a color and I'm like, oh, hey, that's changing this top bar up here. That's kind of cool. This isn't going to work. So I don't want to get too distracted. Oh, maybe it's down here, theme space. Ah, this is it. So you have to open up the subset, theme space. Window background, region background. Dare we dream? Do you guys think this is going to work? Should we do it? Ah, curses. I was so confident that was going to do it. Window background. Yeah, hey, we found it. Cool. Awesome. Make it a little lighter. That doesn't help at all. Made it worse. This kind of sucks. Wow, those curves are really not wanting to show up. I'm very disappointed. Might be able to change the curve colors. Six hours later. Okay, I'll let it go. I'll work on it. I'll see if I can get something better going. But for right now, we'll just say we'll live with it. All right. So, another shortcut is a control space bar. Lets you maximize a window. So, and then to get out of it, you just hit control space bar again. Okay, so this is our curve, and you can see by default, it uses, what do they call it in Blender? So if you right click on a key, it'll say interpolation mode, Bezier. And so I'm going to jump back over to Figma for a second. I'll just put that word down here so we can remember that word. It's French, named after a guy. I forgot what his full name is. A guy called Bezier. He's a mathematician. So he figured this out. So Bezier curves. And if you've ever used Illustrator, or Figma for that matter, you've done any kind of like vector design works, Bezier curves are the thing. And so what the way they work is you have a point and a point, and then you have these handles that come out of each point. And the handles can be manipulated to change the curve. So when they're flat like this, it means it's coming in. I didn't really draw that well, but whatever. It's going to look something like this more. It's going to be a little more even. So they're, you get the idea. That flat handles mean that the curve is coming out at a low angle and then if it's flat in the other one, it's gonna accelerate and then it's gonna flatten back out. So this Bezier curve configuration gives us slow out, accelerate, and then slow in. So it divides it up. So it's definitely a nonlinear curve. So Bezier curves, you can make Bezier curves. You could make this linear. Like if I go and adjust this by dragging that handle and take this handle and drag it there, it's going to be an estimation, but I've basically just created a linear curve. But even though they're still Bezier. So the length of the handle increases the kind of pull of the curve. So it's going to make it. So again, if I flatten this out, it becomes almost linear. Or if I make it smaller. And then if I go up, I get what's called overshoot, where it's actually going to go beyond. This would make on Z, it's going to go up before it goes down. And this is an overshoot effect. So let's check this out. So if I pull this up for overshoot, and it's going to do it, it's going to be kind of weird looking. Let's check it out. So control space bar to get back here. So let's take a look at our animation. So we haven't set any new keys. This is what's important about this. We're just using the same two keys. So the timing is the same. But I think when you get into overshoot, I think you're kind of, in effect, you're adding a key at the peak of this curve. And that's kind of the way I think about it. So overshoot is kind of considered a bit of not a hack. It's not a cheat, but for a lot of animators, like in character animation, you'd be like, yeah, it's cool. I use it because I know what it does, but it's not a good accidental effect to have. But let's see. So if my theory is correct, our box should now move up in space before it comes down. Yeah, so there it goes. It goes up and then it comes down. So it's a nice way to kind of, so animators, a lot of times, well, that would be kind of 6 of one, half dozen of another. It's like, well, I could animate all those because you're kind of getting into like anticipatory action where something goes this way and then it goes this way. That's cool. So overshoot is a nice, cheap, down and dirty way to do it. But a lot of times you'll to get more control over it, to get finer control, you'll actually set keys at the overshoot points. But just showing you how it works. So we could go down, and so now we'd be getting a fast. It would really jump out of the blocks here, and then it would slow down quite a bit here. So let's look at that. And you can see it's also changed the arc of the path. Do you see how it's got kind of a curve movement? It's no longer giving us that really linear move. It's because these are location values. So we're changing the actual movement path as well, not just the rate of it. So that's kind of interesting. So anyway, by default, it's kind of like that. So if you wanted to have something kind of have a more like a jabbier feel, we can also, by moving these points, we're essentially moving the keys like we would on the timeline. So you can do a lot of editing just in the motion graph editor. Now, you don't want a lot of this because you can see what's happening to our object as we move these. We're actually changing the animation really radically. Like if I just take these and move these down, we have a whole new animation. So that's kind of cool. But usually you don't want that. So here we go. But that's a nice illustration of how powerful the graph editor is. You can really just change the world with the graph editor. So let's say we want to change this animation up. So I want to make it happen a little faster. So I'm going to hit G, just like we did out here for G for move, and then X to constrain it to the X axis. So that way I'm not moving, I'm not changing the animation. So if you constrain it to X, it keeps it. So now it's going to happen faster. Okay. And I'm going to say interpolation. I could switch this to linear. I could switch it back to Bezier. And maybe shorten that up a little bit. And now let's maybe do some experiment with a little bit overshoot. So we'll kind of, let's go ahead and do something like that. And maybe do it on the x-axis as well. See what that looks like. Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm going to save that for right now. I didn't really do anything with the curves, but just before, so I'm going to save that. That's my day 2 thing. I'm also going to make a new one. I'm going to make a new animation here. Oh, I said 2D animation. Let's go new 2D animation. Okay. So, all right, so let's do this. Actually, if you guys want to follow along, this is a cool exercise, and we're going to do a bounce, just like we'd said, and we're going to make an object, and we're going to bounce it. So, and make it look realistic, like a trampoline bounce. And we're going to do this only using motion, the graph editor. So this will be kind of cool. This is what I mean by, for motion graphics artists, this is kind of the way you do most things, you know. The power of F curves. So just to review our whole process with this grease pencil thing, we could do this with 3D objects, but let's just keep going with the grease pencil thing. So you open a new 2D animation file. And this time we'll pay a little bit more attention to the, we can do a color or something like that. So, oh, I was watching some anime. I've been watching more anime these days. My son kind of got me into it, but I was watching Attack on Titan. I don't know if anyone's watched that one, but holy moly, that's crazy. I was really into it. It's really good. Haikyuu, that was good. But I was thinking, like, if you look at anime is great, you know, you'll see a lot of different techniques in there of things. We looked at Speed Racer, but things you can kind of think about, how can I do that? You know, how would I make that? You know, and so we'll talk a little bit about color right now. So grease pencil's a little weird in the sense that the way it handles color. It's one of the things I don't particularly care for about it. Something like Adobe Animate, formerly Flash, RIP, which still exists as Animate, but has a really nice way of handling color that's like 1,000 times easier than this. So it's a bit of a drawback, but it's also very workable. And there are some advantages to the way that this method works. It's much closer to a 3D workflow, which can be a benefit, and it's kind of more flexible in one way. and just, you'll see. So first thing about color in grease pencil is that there are two ways to do color. There's what's called vertex painting, and there's materials. And so these are the two options up here. And the default is material mode. And I think we'll stick to that, even though I can't imagine that they won't fix vertex mode to be better than what it is right now, because it's actually really cool. But in practice, it's not the most practical thing. So let's just stick to material mode. And so the way material mode works is, and this, if you've done 3D, this will be very familiar to you. But if you haven't, you'll be like, huh? You'll be like, why? So if you go over here to the properties panel, which we'll get more into this stuff later, and you cruise down here, there's something that looks like this beach ball down here, and that's the material icon, this red beach ball, and it's the same thing as the beach ball up here. So so that beach ball, you go click on that tab, and it gives you this kind of a thing here. So these are the materials that exist on this particular grease pencil object. So they're already assigned to the grease pencil object, so you can use them at your will. So for example, there's one here called squares stroke. That looks cool. It's red. So let's go ahead and experiment with that and see what that does. You're like, oh, that's kind of funky. And then up here, you can change the brush size, and if you have a tablet, how your tablet interacts with this. So strength means it's going to become more or less transparent or opaque depending on the pressure of your brush. For right now, I'm going to turn that off, and I'm just going to disable it here, and I'll just have the strength be at 100% or at 1. The size of the stroke, okay, that's cool. I want to make the stroke bigger so you can kind of see this. I'm just clicking and dragging in here to make it bigger. So now we can kind of see this, the way that this brush stroke works. That's kind of cool. So you can do all kinds of cool stuff. And again, a lot of anime stuff really takes advantage of not necessarily this kind of thing, but like they do very stylized graphic stroke. So anime is a great place to learn to kind of start thinking about motion graphics if you're an anime fan. Because they're really unafraid to experiment with some really interesting kind of ideas. So anyway, there's that. Now, what's kind of cool about the material approach is that all of these strokes out here, each one of these strokes is an individual object that's tied into the material. So if we change the material, all of the strokes will change. So if I go over here and change the base color of this, all the strokes change. That's nice. That's nice. And then if I draw with it some more, it'll be in that same color. If I change it from squares to line, it goes away entirely, or it comes back. So this is kind of funky. So this is computer programming at work, right? Dots, squares, alignment. I haven't even played with this. Well, that's not that. I mean, that's just aligning the strokes themselves, the squares themselves. All right. So cool. So that's what a material is, and you can see it kind of updates up here. And you can give these their own names. So we can call this, Tealy Bob or whatever. So how do I erase stuff? Well, I can use the eraser.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On my screen, I have under base color, there's an option that says hold out. What does that mean?
Oh. Interesting. Actually, will you share your screen with me? I'll stop sharing. I'm
Oh, I would have to. I'm on my phone on
Oh,
Zoom, but I'm
okay.
on my
All right.
computer.
Okay.
I can like here. I'll turn my camera on and.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Hello, I look a
Hey, how's it
mess.
going?
Sorry, I look a mess. So right, can you
So
see it right
square
there?
stroke, base color. Hold on. Interesting. Oh, sorry. Let me turn my fat head off here. I'll pin yours up here. So hold on. Pin. Okay. All right. So square stroke, preview surface stroke, mode type, style solid, base color, holdout. Interesting. Huh. I wonder if you have a newer version than I do.
Yeah, it says remove the color from underneath this stroke by using it as a mask. Actually, when
That's
I hover
cool.
over it.
No, that's a good thing. Holdouts are good.
Yeah, I just didn't
Well,
know what
yeah,
it was.
yeah. So you get a bonus thing that I don't have on mine. I'm not sure why that is. I wonder if you know what version you're using. What does it say if you go up to
Oh,
help and
oh,
then is it under help? Well, mine I'm on a Mac, so it should tell you about Blender or something. But mine, are you on a Mac or a Windows?
no, I'm on a Windows on a PC.
Okay, I think it's under help.
Um,
Or is it preferences?
so I have, it says manual, tutorial, support, user communities, developer community, Python API
Oh,
reference.
oh no, here it is. In the upper left-hand corner of your file menu here, I'll start sharing again. So I think it's up here. Up here, there's a little Blender icon. I think if you click that, it says about.
Oh, okay, yeah. It says 2.91.0.
Yeah, so you have a newer version than I do. That's what it is. So
Okay,
I learned
cool.
something today. That's cool. I need to update my Blender. So you have 2.91. Okay, great. So yeah, that's why. So a holdout is, you can also, we have holdouts up here as well. You can this is the holdout up here. And so it lets you, it's an advanced kind of compositing feature, so you can use it to block things out and mask. It's super cool. So that'd be something to play around with. I'm excited that it's in this. That's actually great. So I'll have to update Blender. Cool. So the eraser here is kind of funky.
Oh, I have another question.
Oh yeah.
How do you make your drawing tool bigger, like your brush bigger?
Yes. If you go here, so here's our pen. If you go to radius up here, and so what I'll tend to do is just click and drag in there, so it's a slider. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is if you hit F and drag left and right, it'll do it that way. So you can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Lord knows what I was doing here. All right. So materials, square strokes. Okay. So the solid stroke black is fine. And so, like I said, I tend to turn the strength up to 100 and turn off the pressure. You don't have to. That's up to you. It's all just different looks. But this gives me more of like a, whoa, what's going on here? So draw. Is this really small? What have I done? Radius. Oh, all right, I don't know what I did. All right, so how do we erase? So we can come here and use the eraser. Eraser soft is kind of weird. Wow, this is really bugging out from this computer. Eraser hard. Or you can switch over to edit mode. And edit mode gives you these choices up here. Do you want to select each point in the stroke itself, or the stroke points between other strokes? So I'll just go and select all these. And those are all the points, and I'll just hit X and I'll say delete points. And then I'll switch back to draw mode to keep drawing. So I'll do that again. So if I draw something and I want to delete it, edit mode, click and drag, hit X, and choose points. And then go back to draw mode. Again, edit mode. This time, instead of clicking and dragging, I'll just hit A for select all, and then hit X and delete points. Back to draw mode. All right. So materials, that's how materials work. You can add new materials up here. So we can make a new material, and then it gives us a new slot. And so these are called material slots up here, and then these are our actual material choices down here. I don't particularly like this part of the interface, but it is what it is. So we hit new, and then now we have a new material, and I can call this, I'll rename this, Miles Aroma or something. And then I'll say, okay, I want to use stroke is checked. I'll leave it line solid, and I'll pick a new color here. So I'll just slide this up. It's beautiful. Oh, I turned the pressure off the radius. Okay, so go back on. It's laggy. All right, so I want to get rid of this. So tab into edit mode. Tab is the shortcut for going to edit mode. A to select all, and X to delete points. And then tab, oh, it takes me back to draw mode. That's nice. So tab's the shortcut for getting out of draw mode. All right, so let's go ahead and get a clean slate here and draw our hero here. It's going to be a box of some sort. And if you want, you can kind of color it in. Wow, my computer does not like this. It's having a hard time. The 3 monitors, I think, on this little laptop is it's kind of awesome. I dig it. All right, whatever. Here, I'll use this. I think is that better? No, not really. It doesn't like me going back and forth with my pen. All right, from my pen to my mouse. All right, so now I've got my box here, and let's animate this. Okay, so to animate it, remember we have to go, let's rename it from stroke. We'll call this GP underscore box. Box. All right. And to animate it, we got to get out of draw mode and go to object mode, because we're going to animate the grease pencil object itself. All right, so one last thing here, we've got our origin point is way down here, which I don't necessarily want it down there. Let's maybe put it somewhere in the middle. So if we want to rotate this box, which we don't, but it'll just make it a little neater. So let's move the origin. Well, we can do that a couple different ways. The easiest way is probably to go into edit mode and select all the strokes and hit G for move, and just move this down so it's basically centered on that. And I can do some cleanup here. Instead of deleting everything, I can click it like I want to get rid of this little tail down here. Instead of using the eraser, I can just go in here and delete those points. Oh, X. There we go. So I kind of clean that up. Then go back to object mode. And now I'm ready to roll. All right, that might have been a lot. So let me just make sure that everyone's good to go. or any questions so far?
This is going to be posted on Moodle, right?
Yep, yep.
Okay, cool.
It's moodling away. Yeah. So, all right, cool. So we've got this ready to go. Now, we covered this last week, but probably forgot. So this window is set to the dope sheet, but it's set to the grease pencil aspect of the dope sheet. So we could either go to the timeline, which is what we used before, or we can leave it on the dope sheet, which is what we should.
Hey, Miles.
Yeah.
Could you share your screen, please?
Oh, sorry. Woo, woohoo.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for reminding me. Makes it so much easier, doesn't it? All right. So right now, this is set to down here. This is set to the grease pencil aspect of the dope sheet. This is the little icon for the dope sheet down here. And it says grease pencil. So since we're not in grease pencil, since we're in object mode up here, we want to switch this over to the old fashioned dope sheet. Dope sheet. And we don't have any keys for our actual object itself. It's a little confusing because if we go back to grease pencil, we do have a key, which is the drawing of the box. But if we switch out of grease pencil to the object mode dope sheet, we don't have any keys. So we're going to set G to move, drag this up here. We're going to set a key. And so we're going to go I location for our grease pencil object. So you have to make sure you're in object mode and that you can then set a key. And sure enough, down in the dope sheet, it shows up here. Now, if I pull this up for a second, we can go open the object transforms, and there's our X location, Y location, and Z location. So we've set a 3D location for this. So each of these will have their own F curve, which we could look at in the graph editor, but we're not going to, which we will do in a moment. So we're in the dope sheet. Okay. So now we're just going to set our timing, right? And so the timing is setting the location of the beginning and the ending of our move on the timeline and adjusting the spacing on the timeline to not the spacing, but adjust the position on the timeline so that we get the right speed. So if I go here, we go to, let's say, I don't know how long that's going to take, 10 frames. And this time, so you'll notice we don't have the auto key or the playback here because that's in the time, that's down here, and there's a little tiny timeline down here. So we could turn on auto key. Let's make this little dot down here, hit it so it's blue. Now whatever we move will automatically update as a keyframe, so we don't have to keep setting keyframes. One of the reasons I don't like that, though, so actually I changed my mind, let's not do it, is that it's going to set other keys like rotation keys and scale keys. And you can turn that off, but it's a little more complicated than we want to get today. So we're not doing a ton of animation. So let's just go ahead and go scrub out to frame 10, G, and we can constrict this to the Z axis, which is up and down. So I could hit G and then followed by Z, and then I can just drag it down on the Z axis. And then I location. So just look at the dope sheet again, where you see this orange bar on X and Y, it means that those are hold keys. There's no change happening. The pose is not changing on X or Y. It's only changing on Z, but we have keys on X and Y. So that's how you set a hold key. That's an important part of life, as we'll see. So now what we can do is, instead of eyeballing this back, we can just go select these keys here. And actually, if we close this, we don't have to look at the details of those. Right now, we can just select that one key set here, and it turns orange. And then we hit Shift D to duplicate. And then we can just drag that set out to frame 20. And then we'll have now we have a bounce. And since this is 250 frames long, we don't want to just sit here and wait for 250 frames. So let's just go ahead and shorten this down to, let's say, like 30 frames. So that doesn't look terrible. But let's take a look at it in the motion graph. The graph editor. So we'll switch this from the dope sheet, this leftmost thing, not the thing that says dope sheet, that would be too sensible, but over here, just this little icon, switch it over to the graph editor. All right. And here's our graph editor. So this blue curve is the Z axis, because the Z axis is blue, as we see up here. So this blue one is the Z axis. And we want to get a curve that looks like our bouncing ball curve, because we're going to mix a bouncing box. So we want to have a curve that goes flat to sharp, sharp to flat. Okay, so we don't have that right now. So now we have something that goes flat to flat, flat to flat, and that's the default. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on this. Let's see, there's some ways to help frame this up. So if you go to view, where is it? Frame all, I think. Yeah, that makes this a little easier to see. And again, apologies for why this is so janky, this color. I don't know why it's so hard to see. I will try to fix that. So put that on the list here. So I need to go. Okay. So we need to make this sharp. So let's go down and we need to basically, these top curves, top tangent handles are okay. We want to fix this bottom one. But if I go here and start to do this to sharpen this curve up, it's messing up our other side. Oh no. So, whoops, we need to fix that. So no problem. We just select that tangent or that keyframe here, that point, right click and choose handle type free. So I'll show you that again. Select our point that we want to adjust, right click, handle type free. Now we can move each side of the Bezier handles separately. So we're going to make kind of our elementary school bird. You notice that I did the classic mistake where I went, oh, that's even one, you know, and you can kind of tell how this is lopsided. It's because I think I put too much. I should put this on frame 19 if I want it to be even. So I'll go GX and slide those over. And now let's play it. So there's our trampoline bounce. And now if I want this to cycle, one way I can do it, this is not a proper cycle. We'll get to that later. But just to show us how we can get the effect of a cycle, we'll go here and we'll set our end to frame 19. And actually I'll set it to frame 18 because that'll be the frame before. So we won't repeat that top. Huh, maybe it is 19. So we could exaggerate this, pull these out to get a little more pronounced so it doesn't seem so. Why is it stopping like that? It seems weird. Might just be my computer. Yeah. All right. Now we can do all the cheating. So that was the hard work. So that was like, oh man, that was hard fought. Did you guys get that to work? It's cool if you did. That's a big one. Now we can do all the motion graphics, sleazy nonsense. So we'll just start off. Well, this will be introduction to sleazy nonsense and motion graphics. So cool. So let's go ahead and we can kind of pull that down. So let's do some cheating now. We've done the hard work. So let's do some cheating. So one of the fun things that we get to do with motion graphics, working with the computer, is we could go over here to the modifiers panel. Ooh, modifiers. It looks like a wrench. Respect my modifiers. Okay. So we've got some modifiers here. This is a different list because this is a grease pencil object. But one of the most fun modifiers is the array. So let's go ahead and use an array modifier. Whoa. And I'll hit G and I'll pull these over. Oops, I have to set a key. Now this is interesting. So watch what happens. Let me get rid of this array modifier. There's a little X up here. I'm going to delete it. So, all right. So before we do the modifier, check this out. So if I go, all right, I'm playing this like, oh, I want to move this whole animation itself over to the right. So I'll pull this back up here. Now, what happens if I just go G and I start to pull this over? Well, it's not pulling the whole animation. You can see the animation remains the same. And so if I key this move on frame 9, it's going to add a really funky, it's going to totally whack out my, my graph down here. It's like, ooh, I don't want that. So what I want is I want to move the whole thing over to the right. So I can go and set keys, but that's kind of a pain. So probably what I'd want to do instead, because this should snap back over because I didn't set a key there, is if I want to move this whole thing over, I'll go to the properties panel and I'll look at the object properties here. This little square box. And this is where we set our property or some keys before. We didn't do that today, but we did it last week. But there's a cool function down here called the delta transform. And this lets us move the whole kit and caboodle relative to where it was set up. So if I go to delta transform, location, X, I can slide this wherever I want. Run out of room here. So I'm gonna move it over here. That looks good. Now if I play this, it goes over there. All right, so I'm not going to use the array modifier yet. So what I'm going to do is I'll get rid of this delta transform for right now. Just want to show you how the delta transform works. So I'm going to make a copy. I'm just going to make a straight copy. So I go Shift D, and I'll just drag this out over here somewhere. Because it's not going to, as soon as I move it, it's going to go snap back. But instead of moving it, what I'll do is I'll just go, okay, this is my copy. I'll use my delta transform, and instead of moving it yet, I'm going to rotate it on Y 90 degrees. I want to play this. Oops, that didn't work. Oh. I'll have to do another thing. What do I have to do to get that to work? Oh well, we'll get to that later. I'm spacing something where I have to use an empty object or something. So to get the super cool effect. So I'm going to delete that copy. Pretend that never happened. Let's just do the array and then we're out because we're out of time. So let's just do an array. So add modifier, array modifier, and let's increase the count to like whatever you want. And then let's go ahead and we can adjust the spacing by using the X factor. And then we can go back to our properties panel, the square box, and adjust the delta transform. Do something like this. That's kind of fun. And there are more things. We'll start to talk about how we can use offsets and things to get some funky effects going on. So pretty soon you can get some really complicated things, but everything's built off of this very kind of simple, these simple principles of timing, spacing, F curves, timing F curves, and the hold keys, poses rather. So yeah, that's good enough for today. That's good. That's all new stuff. I'll post this up to the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is now available on the playlist rather is now available on the Moodle site. Just want to make sure that you can see that. Log in. Okay. Oh, yeah, I'm already logged in. Oh, well, I guess I'm not. Zoom lecture recordings here. So that we'll test it out. Take us to the playlist. Oh, and that's deleted. Well, that's no fun. What happened? That's weird. I guess I'll have to re-upload the last one. Weird. All right, well, I'll figure it out. But more importantly, I'll put the new one up today. So, and I'll update that other one too. So that is working. So it's right there. Cool. And on Thursday, we'll kind of finish up this. We'll do some really cool stuff that looks complicated and nifty, and you'll amaze your friends. And then we'll kind of fully start project 1, which will be your first motion graphics piece. This is just kind of us messing around and playing around with things. And we'll discuss that on Thursday as well. So upload. upload. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Any other questions before we take off? All right. Yeah, keep looking at your own motion graphic stuff. Keep posting stuff to the Discord. It's really cool to see what people are posting there. It's really helpful, and that's going to be a big part of what we do next. Is we'll start to you're going to storyboard out, and we'll talk about the drama of motion graphics, because we've kind of been talking about the technique, the technical aspect of motion graphics for this first 3 days, and then we're going to talk about the why of what are some things that can be meaningful in motion graphics. So now we're just like, moving things around the screen, and it feels kind of technical. It's not very interesting in a way, but how do we make it interesting? How do we start to communicate with this new language that we're learning? So, all right, well, take care of yourselves. Hope you guys get some sleep and some rest, and get a chance to get outside and de-stress a little bit, and then we'll check in on Thursday. All right, and I'll get those videos up today. Okay, cheers, guys. I'll catch you later.
Miles.
Okay, good to see everybody.
Thank you.
All right, good to see you. Hey, Gabby.